Congratulations, 2020 graduates. Let me just say that again. Congratulations. Job well done. You did it. And even though we're not able to celebrate with an in-person commencement, much like we had planned, and I'm simply giving some encouragement to you via video, let me just affirm the work that you have done and the achievement that this graduation signifies for you. In fact, for most people, the graduation from high school is the very first time that they mark an achievement that for them spanned a long period of time. This is something you've been working toward for a long time, for many years. And perhaps as a 5-year-old, you weren't thinking in terms of goals that were set for graduation from high school or something like that. But as time wore on, you began to think about what that accomplishment would involve. You began to complete coursework in classes, things that needed to be done in order for you to meet certain standards. And that's not something that you just did in a few days or that you just did in a few weeks. It's something that for you spanned years. And so the fact that you have now achieved that mark is commendable. So great job. We're proud of you. We are genuinely proud of you. But as I thought about what could I share with you that would be meaningful, a word of encouragement, but also contain an element of challenge in it, let me mention just a couple of things. And one of those is to remember that this is not something that you have done by yourself. You've worked hard. You really have. And you are the one who completed the work. You are the one who had to meet those standards. But let's be real. This is not something that you did by yourself. First of all, there were others who contributed to your effort here. Your parents, certainly, a mom or a dad. Perhaps it was other family members who also helped and contributed in that aspect. Maybe it was friends or siblings who at times gave you just the amount of encouragement that you needed to complete something, or perhaps who made that even a little bit more of a challenge, but who helped you or assisted you or helped you with a problem, helped you achieve something that you couldn't figure out on your own. Or maybe it was just something that they said or a question that they asked that prompted you to think more deeply about something and enhanced the work that you were already doing. There are a lot of people who have contributed to this moment for you, who have poured into you, who have invested in you. But beyond those people who have invested in you in all of this, let all of us remember that it is the grace of God which has enabled all of us to become who we are and to pursue and achieve that which we pursue and achieve, hopefully, under God's guidance. There's this great verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 where the Apostle Paul is writing to the folks at the church at Corinth there, and he's talking about, in particular, the 12 apostles. He gives a short summary of the gospel there that God gave to the apostles. And then Paul also acknowledges that he, too, is an apostle, though he is not like the 12 who walked with Jesus for those 3 years of ministry that Jesus had, who sat in those close moments with him as he healed people, as he taught from the Word. Paul was someone who became an apostle much later on, and largely through this dramatic, radical encounter with the risen Christ on the road to Damascus. And yet Paul acknowledges that God had done a work in his life. God had brought him to a point where he had prepared him for a particular work. And Paul says there in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 10, I am what I am by the grace of God, and his grace to me is not in vain. We could do well to remember that as a daily activity in our lives. I am who I am by the grace of God. Paul goes on to say, actually, in the next couple of verses that he worked harder. In fact, there's even kind of this almost humorous note to it where Paul suggests perhaps that he even worked harder than some of the other apostles. And yet he said it wasn't his work, but it was the grace of God in him that brought him to that point. And I would just encourage you to consistently remember that. Job well done. But remember always that element of humility that calls to mind the fact that what I have accomplished has been because of God's grace to me, because of God's Spirit at work in me, because of those that God brought around me to sharpen me as iron sharpens iron, to note that verse in Proverbs that reminds us that God uses some of those other people. Behind those people, behind your efforts in reaching this point, is the hand of a masterful God who, by His grace, has enabled you to come to this specific and precious moment in your educational life. And so we give Him praise. So one of my words to you on a day like this, or at a time like this, would be to always remember that you are who you are by the grace of God, that you've come to this moment because of what He has done. But I think as well of what it is that I could say that would both encourage you, but also inspire and perhaps even challenge you a bit. I would also say, given that truth, given that you are who you are by the grace of God, then pursue His calling for your life enthusiastically and fervently. Be all in, as it were, in pursuing that which God has prepared you for, and that to which God is calling you. For many of us in the season of life where you are, this is a season where you'll be listening more intently and more directly for that calling. What is it that God has prepared you for? What is it that God is urging and drawing you to do? And for some of us, there may be a particular thing that defines our calling for life. And for others of us, there may be points at which that calling shifts slightly, perhaps takes on a slightly different cast, but is a continuation of something that God had already begun in us. That same Apostle Paul recognized that God had fashioned him for a particular purpose. And even within kind of God's response to that moment on the road to Damascus, God gave Paul a sense of what it is that his calling was, to take the good news of Jesus Christ to the Gentiles around the world. And that defined what it is that Paul did for the rest of his life, for all that he did. If we think of that notion that we are who we are by the grace of God, Paul later on wrote to the church at Ephesus, the second chapter actually of the book of Ephesians, to remind the people there that we, all of us, are God's workmanship. The Greek word there is poiema, that which someone makes. It's actually a word that's used in the literature for a craftsman who fashions a work of art. That's what Paul says. That's what the Bible says that your life is. It's a work of art that God, the master craftsman, has created. With this sense then, at the end of that verse, chapter 2, verse 10, with the idea then that we are created to do good works. We live out that calling. God has fashioned you as a work of art for a particular purpose. And my encouragement then to you would be to pursue that purpose diligently, enthusiastically, and fervently. One of the things that research tells us is that one of the most telling characteristics of those who achieve and accomplish and make a difference is something that researcher Angela Duckworth has called grit. It's that kind of thing that makes you hang in there even when the going gets tough, even when everyone else is wanting to give up, even when everyone else has had enough and they throw up their hands and they walk away. But there are some who possess this quality of grit, is what she calls it. That thing that causes them to stay the course. That intangible thing, that attitude, that disposition of heart, that we would call it maybe guts. The guts that just allow us to endure and to persevere even when the going gets tough. One of the things, it's certainly not the only thing, but one of the things that factors into this notion of grit in our lives is a sense of calling. This idea that God has fashioned us as a work of art for a particular purpose and now is preparing us and shaping us and launching us out to fulfill that particular purpose. And we do well, one, to recognize it and then to pursue it and allow it to help us be the thing that keeps us in the game, even when the going seems futile. Early in my life after college, I was being interviewed by a producer who was putting together a video for the Salvation Army's camping work that I was actively involved in at that season of my life. And after we had kind of talked through some of the different things that we would want to feature in the video and stuff, she kind of set her notebook down and she looked at me across the chair and she said to me, "Why do you do this? What causes a young person like yourself to want to do this?" She said, "I'm sure that you're not being paid a lot." And she said, "I'm sure the work that you're doing is hard. It's not something that gets recognized by a lot of people and celebrated." She said, why do you do this?" And I looked her in the eye and I said, "Well, because it's my calling. It's what God has called me to do." And she said, "What does that mean?" There was no category of thought for her with this idea that her Maker could have given her not just who she is, but with a sense of a calling, a direction, a purpose for her life. One of my strong encouragements to you would be to use this time to discern what that purpose is. And once you're beginning to gain some clarity about that, then go all in. Pursue that purpose with abandon. Pursue that purpose with everything that you have within you. People who do that accomplish great things. And when I say great, I'm not talking about things that a lot of people notice. Sometimes the greatest things go unseen except by our Creator who fashioned us the way that we are. The only other place in the New Testament where that same word, craftsmanship, shows up, workmanship, is actually in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, and it's used there in reference to God's work of creation of the world. The same word that talks about God creating the world with His purposes in mind is used then of His work of creation in you. The master craftsman has fashioned you a work of art and has a purpose and a calling for what He has done and who you are. Give yourself to figuring out what that is, listening to His Holy Spirit in your life, talking to the wise people around you who might be able to notice some of that, thinking about those things that you have a passion for or that burden your heart. And as you ponder that and as God's Spirit confirms that, when you've identified what that sense of calling is, then give yourself to that. For one, I believe it'll give you a sense of joy like nothing else in this world, because God's grace is at work in your life, helping you live that out, that intimate experience every day of His Spirit at work in you. But two, it will also be the thing that keeps you in it for the long haul. It'll be the thing that ensures that this graduation from high school is not the only long-term thing that you accomplish in your life, but that whenever you come to the end of your life, you'll be able to look back and see the hand of the sovereign Creator and what His grace has done in your life and through you. Some of you may have a bit of a sense of what that calling might be, and some of you may be saying, "Keith, I have no clue." Give yourself to discovering what that is. Pursue what it is initially, and as you begin to gain clarity for that, pursue it with abandon. Pursue it enthusiastically, fervently, with everything that your heart can muster. And I'm convinced when you do, that God's grace will work in and through you in such a way that you'll be stunned at what God accomplishes through you. Trust me on this. You are who you are by the grace of God, and we celebrate that. That God is a master craftsman who has fashioned you as a work of art with a purpose, with a sense of calling. And there's no greater channel of His grace in this world, and no greater mark, I believe, of greatness in your life in the future than living out day by day by day the great calling that God has fashioned for you. So congratulations. Well done on this first step in that exciting journey. Remember that you've come to this moment by the grace of God. Celebrate that. Remember that that God is a master craftsman who has fashioned you as a work of art with a purpose and a calling. And now give yourself to that. Give yourself to His Spirit's calling in your life and rejoice each day along the way as you see His grace unleashed in a life well lived.